Hello friends, I am Professor Smita Jha from the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, and I am here to discuss research methodology with a special consideration of literature review with the title Various Steps of Literature Review, because we all know that literature review is very important part of research activity. So a literature review discusses published information in a particular subject area and sometimes information in a particular subject area within a certain period. A literature review can be just a simple summary of the sources, but it usually has an organizational pattern and combines both summary and synthesis. A summary is a recap of the important information of the source, but a synthesis is a reorganization or a reshuffling of that information. It might give a new interpretation of old material or combine new with old interpretations, or it might trace the intellectual progression of the field, including major debates. Depending on the situation, the literature review may evaluate the sources and advise the reader on the most pertinent or relevant. But how is a literature review different from an academic research paper? The main focus of an academic research paper is to develop a new argument, and a research paper is likely to contain a literature review as one of its part. In a research paper, you use the literature as a foundation and as support for a new insight that you contribute. The focus of a literature review, however, is to summarize and synthesize the arguments and ideas of others without adding new contributions. Why do we write literature reviews? Literature reviews provide you with a handy guide to a particular topic. If you have limited time to conduct research, literature reviews can give you an overview or act as a stepping stone. For professionals, they are useful reports that keep them up to date with what is current in the field. For scholars, the depth and breadth of the literature review emphasizes the credibility of the writer in his or her field. Literature reviews also provide a solid background for a research paper's investigation. Comprehensive knowledge of the literature of the field is essential to most research papers. When writing a research paper on a specific topic, you will often need to include an overview of any prior research that has been conducted on that topic. For example, if your research paper is describing an equipment on fear conditioning, then you will probably need to provide an overview of prior research on fear conditioning. That overview is typically known as literature review. Now, strategies for writing the literature review, which is very important part. So, first is find a focus. It should be focused. A literature review, like a term paper, is usually organized around ideas, not the sources themselves, as an annotated bibliography would be organized. This means that you will not just simply list your sources and go into detail about each one of them one at a time. No, as you read widely but selectively in your topic area, consider instead what themes or issues connect your sources together. Do they present one or different solutions? Is there an aspects of the field that is missing? How well do they present the material, and do they portray it according to an appropriate theory? Do they reveal a trend in the field, a raising debate? Pick one of these themes to focus the organization of your review. Now, convey it to your reader. A literature review may not have a traditional thesis, a statement, one that make an argument, but you do need to tell readers what to expect. Try writing a simple statement that lets the reader know what is your main organizing principle. There are some examples like the current trend in treatment for congestive heart failure combines surgery and medicine. More and more cultural studies scholars are accepting popular media as a subject worthy of academic consideration. Now, consider organization. You have got a focus and you have stated it clearly and directly. Now, what is the most effective way of presenting the information? What are the most important topics, subtopics that your review needs to include, and in what order should you present them? them. Develop an organization for your review at both a global and local level. First, cover the basic categories. Just like most academic paper, literature reviews almost must contain at least 3 basic elements: an introduction or background information section, the body of the review containing the discussion of sources, and finally a conclusion and or recommendation section to end the paper. Now, introduction gives a quick idea of the topic of the literature review, such as the central theme or organizational pattern. Body contains your discussion of sources and is organized either chronologically, thematically, or methodologically. Conclusion recommendations discuss what you have drawn from reviewing literature so far. Where might the discussion proceed? Now, the organizing the body, how do you organize the body? Once you have the basic categories in place, then you must consider how you will present the sources themselves within the body of your paper. Create an organizational method to focus this section even further. To help you come up with an overall organizational framework for your review, consider these scenarios. You have decided to focus your literature review on materials dealing with sperm whales. This is because you have just finished reading Moby Dick and you wonder if that whale's portrayal is really real. You start with some articles about the physiology of sperm whales in biology journals written in the 1980s. But these articles refer to some British biological studies performed on whales in the early 18th century. So, you check those out. Then, you look up a book written in 1968 with information on how sperm whales have been portrayed in other forms of art, such as in Alaskan poetry, in French painting, or an whale bone, as the whale hunters in the late 19th century used to do. Now, consider some typical ways of organizing the sources into reviewing. Chronologically, if your review follows the chronological method, you could write about the material according to when they were published. For instance, first you would talk about the British biological studies of the 18th century, then about Moby Dick published in 1851, then the book on sperm whales in Other Art 1968, and finally the biology article 1980s and the recent articles on American whaling of the 19th century. By publication, order your sources by publication chronology, then only if the order demonstrates a more important trend. For instance, you could order a review of literature on biological studies of sperm whales if the progression revealed a change in dissection practices of the researchers who wrote or conducted the studies. By trend, a better way to organize the sources chronologically is to examine the sources under other trend, such as the history of whaling. Then your review would have subsections according to eras within this period. Thematic reviews of literature are organized around a topic or issue rather than the progression of time. However, progression of time may still be an important factor in a thematic review. For instance, the sperm whale review could focus on the development of the harpoon for whale hunting. While their study focuses on one topic, harpooning technology, it will still be organized chronologically. The only difference here between a chronological and a thematic approach is what is emphasized the most. The development of the harpoon or the harpoon technology, but more authentic thematic reviews tend to break away from chronological order. For instance, a thematic review of material on sperm whales might examine how they are portrayed as evil in cultural documents. The subsection might include how they are personified, how their proportions are exaggerated, and their behaviors misunderstood. A review organized in this manner would shift between time periods within each section according to the point made. Now, methodological, which is very important. A methodological approach differs from the two that the focusing factor usually does not have to do with the content of the material. Instead, it focuses on methods of the researcher or writer. For the sperm whale project, the one methodological approach would be to look at cultural differences between the portrayal of whales in American, British and French artwork, or the review might focus on the economic impact of whaling on a community. A methodological scope will influence either the types of documents in the review or the way in which these documents are discussed. Sometimes, though, you might need to add additional sections that are necessary for your study but do not fit in the organizational strategy of the body. What other section you include in the body is up to you. Put in only what is necessary. Now, there are some sections you might want to consider, like current situation, information necessary to understand the topic or focus of the literature review. History, the chronological progression of the field, the literature, or an idea that is necessary to understand the literature review. If the body of the literature review is not already a chronology, the criteria you use to select the sources in your literature review or the way in which you present your information. For instance, you might explain that your review include only peer-reviewed article and journal. Now, begin composing. Once you have settled on a general pattern of organization, you are ready to write each section. There are a few guidelines you should follow during the writing stage as well. However, other studies have shown that even gender neutral antecedents are more likely to produce masculine images than feminine ones. Hamilton asked students to complete sentences that required them to fill in a pronouns that argued with gender neutral antecedents such as writer, pedestrian and persons. The students were asked to describe any image they had when writing the sentences. Hamilton found the people imagined 3.3 men to each woman in the masculine generic condition and 1.5 men per woman in the unbiased condition. Thus, while ambient sexism accounted for some of the masculine bias, sexist language amplified the effect. Now, why sexist language affects persuasion? The role of homophily, intended audience and offense, women and language. Use evidence. In the example, the writers refer to several other sources when making their point. A literature review in this sense is just like any other academic research paper. Your interpretation of the available sources must be backed up with evidence to show that what you are saying is valid. Be selective. Select only the most important points in each source to highlight in the review. The type of information you choose to mention should relate directly to the review's focus, whether it is thematic, methodological, or chronological. Use quotes sparingly. Falk and Mills do not use any direct quotes. This is because the survey nature of the literature review does not allow for in-depth discussion or detailed quotes from the text. Some short quotes here and there are okay, though if you want to emphasize a point or if what the author said just cannot be rewritten in your own word. Notice that Falk and Mills do quotes certain terms that were coined by the author, not common knowledge or taken directly from the study. Summarize and synthesize. Remember to summarize and synthesize your sources within each paragraph as well as throughout the review. The authors here recapitulate important features of Hamilton's study, but then synthesize it by rephrasing the study's significance and relating it to their own work. keep your own voice. While the literature review presents others' ideas, your voice, the writer, should remain front and center. Notice that Falk and Mills weave references to other sources into their own text, but they still maintain their own voice by starting and ending the paragraph with their own ideas and their own words. Use caution when paraphrasing. When paraphrasing a source that is not your own, ensure that you accurately represent the author's information or opinions in your own words. In the preceding example, Falk and Mills either directly refer in the text to the author of their source, such as Hamilton, or they provide ample notation in the text when the ideas they are mentioning are not their own. For example, Gassels, that is available on the website. Now, you need to revise several times, draft in hand. Now, you are ready to revise. Spending a lot of time revising is a wise idea, because your main objective is not to present the material, not the argument. So, check over your review again to make sure it follows the assignment or your outline. Then, just as you would for most other academic forms of writing, rewrite or rework the language of your review so that you have presented your information in the most concise manner possible. Be sure to use terminology familiar to your audience. Get rid of unnecessary jargon or slang. Benefit of literature review. Literature reviews allow you to gain familiarity with the current knowledge in your chosen field, as well as the boundaries and limitations of the field. Literature reviews also help you to gain an understanding of the theory driving the field, allowing you to place your research question into context. Literature reviews provide an opportunity for you to see and even evaluate successful and unsuccessful assessment and research methods in your field. Literature reviews prevent you from duplicating the same information as others writing in your field, allowing you to find your own unique approach to your topic. Literature reviews give a familiarity with the knowledge in your field, giving you the chance to analyze the significance of your additional research. Systematic or evidence-based literature review. These are explicit and transparent method. They follow the standard protocol or series of steps often established in consultation with a panel. All procedures are documented. That is, there is a research audit trail of database and search terms used so that others can easily replicate the steps followed. The documented procedure might include the search parameters, database used, how papers were analyzed. Criteria for inclusion in the final review. The systematic review was originally developed in the field of medicine through the coherence collaboration, while its origin lie in the field of evidence-based healthcare. It has also been adopted by some researchers. Because of its rigorous approach and transparent methodology, it helps to eliminate bias from the selection of literature. Evaluation and synthesis. Things to consider as you evaluate and synthesize. Provenance. What are the author's credentials? Are the author's argument supported by evidence, that is primary historical material, case studies, narrative, statistic, recent scientific findings? Methodology, where the technique used to identify, gather and analysis and data appropriate to addressing the research problem. Was the sample size appropriate? Were the result effectively interpreted and reported? Objectivity, is the author's perspective even-handed or prejudicial? It is contrary data considered, or is certain pertinent information ignored to prove the author's point? Persuasiveness, which of the authors these are most convincing, least convincing? Value, are the author's argument and conclusion convincing? Does the work ultimately contribute in any significant way to an understanding of the subject? disseminating of research findings. So, the literature review also plays a key role in the dissemination of research findings. In order to be published, research must demonstrate that it is original and adds to the current state of knowledge in the field. By conducting a thorough literature review, the researcher can demonstrate that their research is relevant and original and that it addresses a gap in the current state of knowledge. Additionally, the literature review also allows the researcher to situate their own work within the broader context of the field and to provide a clear and concise overview of the research of the audience. So, what are the different types of literature review? Literature reviews come in many forms. They can be part of a research paper, for example, as part of the introduction section. They can be one chapter of doctoral dissertation. Literature reviews can also stand alone as separate articles by themselves. For instance, some journals such as Annual Review of Psychology, Psychological Bulletin and other typically publish full-length review articles. Similarly, in courses based on research methodology, you may be asked to write a research paper that is itself a literature review. Alternatively, you may be expected to include a literature review as part of a larger research paper. Now, different states as we have already defined, but as to know again defining the research question. What you need to do, some exploratory searching of literature to get a sense of a scope to determine whether you need to narrow or broaden your focus. Identify database that provide the most relevant sources and identify relevant terms. Finalize your research question. Determine inclusion, exclusion criteria. Think about relevant dates, geographies and conflicting points of view. Choose databases and conduct the research. So, searches in the published literature via the identified databases. Check to see if this topic has been covered in other discipline database. Review your results. Save your research results in a citation management tool. Then deduplicate your research result. Make sure that you have found the seminal pieces. Then check with your professor or librarian to make sure your research has been comprehensive. Synthesize the information gathered. Evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of individual sources and evaluate for bias, methodologies and thoughtless. Group your results into an organizational structure that will support why your research needs to be done or that provides the answer to your research question. Develop your conclusion. Analyze the information gathered. Are there gaps in the literature? Where has significant research taken place and who has done it? Is there consensus or debate on this topic? Which methodological approaches work best? Write the literature review like pick an organization structure, theme, appropriate concept, methodology. Organize your citation and focus on your research question and compile your bibliography. The instinct behind the objectivity of any study is not remarkable different from the complete focus of the most research work. As a matter of fact, human quest for growth or development often generate unanticipated consequences. These consequences are exemplified in dislocations that often cause the arousal of interest or attention of social researchers. At the initial stage of problem interest attraction, there is a consistent romance between the research actor and the substantial problem requiring to be solved. The research objective in this regard tends to help the researcher define his or her scope of study, assist in projecting the variables that are most germane to the study and offer clues on how best they can be measured. Give direction on the appropriate steps to follow in order to generate solution to the problem under focus. Provide a specific boundary to the coverage of the research, permit judicious use of research resources, aid the avoidance of collecting irrelevant data that are not in tandem with the research focus. Now, in few cases, research often lies in the group domain. This is what Robinson described by making group decision. Whether research coalesces a significant number of people. The objective of a study is collectively produced through the collation, analysis, selection of most appropriate option of the figment of ideas of the group members of certain topics for investigation. Pressure, interest driven research objectives. So, in many cases researches are conducted under a specified area of interest handed down by commissions or organization. In this regard, the researcher is expected to draw from the concern of the sponsor and make workable objectives to meet the requirements stipulated by the financer of the project. In what propelled objective of a study, being independent in developing or raising the subject matter of any research endeavor automatically qualifies a researcher to think inward in the generation of the suitable objective of a study. The study's objective form an important aspect of individual research. However, in view of Robinson, this liberty should exclude the introduction of prejudice or bias likely to be occasioned by the foreknowledge a researcher has on the particular study. In case of writing long essays in the university, students are guided to formulate sensible ideas about what the objectives of their study should be. So, they run with such ideas to get the destination of the research effort. Now, how to align objective with research questions? So, the harmony between the research objective should be questions and hypothesis is critical. Objectives define what you aim to achieve, research question specify what you seek to understand, and hypothesis predict the expected outcomes. So, this alignment ensures a coherent and focused research endeavor. Achieving it necessitates a thoughtful consideration of how each component interrelates, ensuring that the objectives are not only ambitious, but directly answerable through the research questions and testable by a hypothesis. Some objectives of research include like access to new facts. Research can help discover new information. Scientific description. Research can help describe a phenomenon or group. Forecasting the future. Research can help predict future events, providing solution to problem. Research can help find logical solution to problem. Innovations and renewal. Research can help create new ideas and improve existing one. What comes first, research question or objective? Designing a research hypothesis is supported by a good research question and will influence the type of research design for the study. Acting on the principles of appropriate hypothesis development, the study can then confidently proceed to the development of the research objective. It is important to note that research questions and objectives are not mutually exclusive. A study can have one or several question and objective. A well-defined research question should lead to a specific objectives necessary to answer the question. Now, why research questions are important? A strong research question guides the design of a study. So, moreover, it helps determining the type of research and identify a specific objective. Research questions state the specific issue you are addressing and focus on the outcome of the research for individual to learn. Therefore, it helps break up the study into essay steps to complete the objectives and answer the initial question. So, to conclude, research question and objectives are two distinct aspects of the research process. Research questions are broad statements that guide the overall direction of research, while research objectives are specific measurable goals that the research aims to achieve. So, understanding these two terms differences is essential for conducting effective and meaningful research. And a research hypothesis is predictive statement about the possible outcome of the study. With this, I wrap up the discussion. Let us meet in another lecture with another topic. Till then, thank you.